Hello everyone, my name is Burak Güzel and welcome to another episode of Codeigniter from scratch, and this will be episode number 15, and we're going to talk about profiling, benchmarking, and hooks. So today we're not building a new project, we're going to use an existing project to demonstrate profiling. So what I want you to do is go and find the article for the calendar library. Um, so that's an episode from February 26th, and download the source code, and we're going to use that source code. So I have that open here, and I'm going to give you my first example now. First open the project from the browser. So I'm going to open it. Localhost CI series is the URL. The default page, the welcome page, is loading, and something to note in this page is at the bottom it says page rendered in so many seconds. So that's going to be your first benchmarking tool. So if you look at the view, which is welcome message.php under the views folder, at the bottom of the code you'll see this tag. It just says elapsed time, elapsed underscore time within curly braces, and that's automatically rendered by Codeigniter's template engine to turn it into a benchmark for how long it took for the whole page to load, from generating and outputting, everything included. So that's something basic you can include at the end of your pages. Also, you might want to hide it from browsers. You can just put it inside HTML quotes, so it's not part of your visible page, but you can look at the source code and see what happened as a developer. So that's the simplest way of benchmarking, and there are other ways, and I'm going to get into profiling first. To enable the profiler, just open the controller for that welcome page, which is welcome.php, and here we're going to, right after the parent controller call in the controller constructor, um, you do this output enable profiler and true. You should notice that that I did not load any kind of library. This is because the profiler is part of the output library and it's loaded automatically. So there's only a single line you have to put in. So let's refresh. Did I save the file? I think so. Let's refresh the page, and you'll see this whole section at the end of your page. So to go through it one by one, the first part is the URI string. See, it says no URI data because that's only the part after the main URL, and since we loaded the default page, there's no data. So we could have loaded the same page by going /welcome, and then you would see that in that box. And the class and method. So the URL usually translates into the class method, but sometimes it can be different. It can be routed differently. So you'll see the actual controller class and the method that was loaded. And the memory usage is right here. This tells us the amount of memory used by the PHP script itself, and that's I believe at the bottom of the script execution. It's not the peak usage, it's just the usage at the time the profiler called that function. And I will show you how you can get the peak usage also, not just the final usage. So now the next box is benchmarks. This is basically the timing benchmarks. Um, and Codeigniter takes some time to load all the base classes, the core classes, and that's displayed here in the first line. And the second line is the code in your controller method that was executed, how long that took, and you get the final execution total time. this is the same number displayed by that elapsed time tag in your view. Um, so if there was any get data, that would be here. If there was a form post, that would be here. And if there was any queries that ran with a database class, that would be here. So now let's go ahead and um, enable the profiler in the calendar page. But before I do that, I'm going to open that page, which was mycal/display. As you see, I'm getting a database error, so I need to create that table. It was called calendar with two fields, and the field name, first one is date, and the second one was data. So it was a date type with a primary index, and data would be text, and that's it. So if I go back to the page, it's going to load. And now I'm going to enable the profiler and open that controller. And let's create a constructor. Let's call it the same name as the class, or you could also use the PHP 5 style. And of course, you have to call the parent constructor and copy pasting that profiler enabling line. Now we can load this page, and you'll see that all that data is outputted here, and the memory usage is a little higher than the welcome page. The execution time is a little higher, and there was a database query that was executed, and how long that took is displayed, which is nice. Now this way you can identify any kind of slow running queries. In most cases in web applications, your bottleneck is the database, so this is a nice way of identifying where the problem is coming from. Now what I'm going to show you is adding benchmarks into custom points in your code. There's a benchmarks table here already, but it only shows certain things like the loading of the base classes and your controller execution time and nothing else. But you can add additional benchmarks to this. And for example, there was a model in this project called mycal model, and there was a bunch of code that gets executed when I call the generate function. And you can see that model here. So I want to know how long that takes. I want to know how long this line here takes. And I can load the benchmarks like this benchmark. And there's no loading of the class because it's already loaded automatically for you. And then you create a marker. So I'm going to create a marker called generate. And you got to put the starting marker or and end marker. So I'm going to copy paste that, and you got to put underscore start at the end of the first marker and underscore end at the end of the second marker where it ends. Now we're creating a benchmark that measures the time it takes between these 2 points. Now I can refresh this page, and you'll see that new benchmark listed here. So that's how you can add multiple different benchmarks, which is very easy to use. Now the profiler is enabled in the controller. So if you have many controllers, you would have to put this in every single controller. Now there are two ways you can enable it for all controllers. You can either extend the core controller class and add it to the constructor of that controller class, or you can use hooks. I want to introduce the concept of hooks, so we're going to use hooks to do this. So what I'm going to do is comment it out, and pretend we never put these in, and create a hook that makes sure that line of code is called before every controller. So we get the profiler enabled for all controllers. To be able to use hooks, now we have to go into config, hooks.php, and you'll see that there's no code here. What you need to do is create a hook array. And the hook array will have some index, and the element will be some sort of array. Now, the index of this array will be when the hook is executed. So it could be one of the following. I'm going to look at the user guide to show you the possible hooks. It's under hooks, extending the core section. And at the bottom, you will see which hook points are available. Oh, also before we can use hooks, you have to go into the config file, config.php, and enable hooks. This option needs to be set to true because by default it's false and it will ignore all the hooks. So go back, and hooks are basically you have these points, and you can select which point you want, and at that point you can call a function or a class method of your choice. For example, the pre-system hook would be called very early during system execution as it's described here. So, for example, pre-controller, this would be called before any kind of controller is loaded. And post-controller constructor is immediately after the controller's constructor is called. And for example, it's a perfect way for us. This almost translates into the post-controller constructor hook. So I'm going to use that in my hook. So you put that as array index. So at that point, what you want to be executed is defined with code like this array here. Copy paste this. Now the hook code could be inside of a class. In our case, I'm not going to use a class. And the function is either the class method name or just if it's a procedural function, which that's going to be our case, and where that file can be found and the parameters to be passed to that function. So I'm going to not pass any parameters. And the file path, I will leave it as hooks. So this is relative to your application folder. So application/hooks. So I'm going to have a file here, and that file name, I want it to be profiler.php, for example. And I want to have a function in that file called profiler hook. So at this hook point, it will load this file under this path and call this function, which I'm going to create right now. Under the hooks folder, new PHP file, profiler.php, a function named profiler hook. So now this is going to be called every time. Again, to remind you right now, the profiler is disabled because I commented out all those lines. So there's no profiler loading if you refresh. But this is being called. So for example, if I do echo test, so this is being called. You see the output on the welcome page, same thing right there. So instead of that, we're going to enable the profiler. And that's that line. We can just copy paste. There you go. Now let's try and see what happens. Oh, fatal error. What happened? It's because this is not available here, obviously, because we're not inside of a class, and certainly we're not inside of a Codeigniter class. So to get access to those Codeigniter functions like the output library and enable profiler, you have to get access to the Codeigniter's main class. And you can get that by using the getInstance function. and you assign it to, let's say, a variable named CI, and you have to use assignment by reference because this CI, this object returned by get instance exists only once. There's only one instance of that object that is passed by reference, so we don't duplicate or clone it, and that's how you access that. And now you can go replace this with CI. Now this should load. Refresh. Profiler is loading. Refresh this. Also, welcome page profiler is loading. So let's say you want this to be done only for you as the developer, but not for the public. You can do that, for example, by checking the IP address. Well, in this case, I'm working locally, so my IP address will be 127.0.0.1. That's localhost, and the IP address is contained in this environment variable. Server remote ADDR, that's the IP address of the server. And so put that as a condition around this. You'll see, well, it's still being loaded. So if this wasn't matching, let's say if it was 2 and my IP is not matching, it's not being loaded. So that's what the public would see, no profiler. But as a developer, you would see the profiler. Okay, but now even as a developer, you may not want to see the output inserted into your page's output, the profiler output. I mean, so sometimes you want this to be logged in the file instead. So, but there's no option for this. The profiler doesn't provide that option. So I'm going to go back to a subject we already covered and utilize that. We're going to extend a core library. This was part of like one of the previous episodes. So if you're not familiar, you might want to go back to that. Let's look at the core libraries that handle this stuff and then work on extending them. I'm going to go into the system folder and go into the libraries folder, and I'm just going to tell you so we don't waste time already. It's output.php and profiler.php. That those files are what we're interested in, and in output.php the function we're interested in is underscore display. Basically towards the end of that method here, the profiler is being run at this line 263, and this output library gets the output from the profiler and appends it to the big output, the general output of the page. That's why it gets inserted, and it does this string replacement thing where it inserts it before the body and HTML tags, so it doesn't go after the HTML tags. Anyway, so let's look at this profiler run function, which is under profiler.php. And this is the profiler class, and at the bottom you'll see the run method. And the run method generates all these separate boxes of the profiler and builds that output and returns it to the output class. Now we have 2 points where we can stop this from going into the final output. So we can either override this function, return an empty output, and dump that output into a file, or we can do the same thing here. Instead of appending it to the output, we can dump it into a file. This function, this method here is a little bigger, so I'm just going to go ahead and overload the run method instead. It's up to you. You can choose either one. So to overload this method, we have to extend the profiler class. For that, you go into application/libraries and create a new PHP file named myprofiler. And your class will be called myprofiler. And it needs to extend the core class, which is ci_profiler. So the let me close these. Close that. we're going to overload this function method. So I'm going to copy that. So I don't want to disturb any of this stuff. So the new overloaded version does all that again, or just does the same thing. And we're going to stop this right here from returning the output and return just an empty string and take that output and put it into a log file. Now, where to put that? Under the system folder, you'll see there's a logs folder. Usually error logs and things like that go into here, but we can use the same folder, so we don't create a new folder for this. So just call file, put contents, and the file name will be the base path. Base path is a constant that translates into the system folder's path. So base path slash logs slash, let's call the file profiler.php, and output goes in it. So we made it so that the output is not going to go into the browser but into the file instead. And I'm going to reload the page and see if that's the case. Voila. Now go back to the logs folder, and I have to refresh, hitting F5, and I see the profiler.php created here. And if you look at the file, you'll see all this output. It may not be very readable as it's HTML content here. So you can just simply open that in your browser. So I'm going to open a new tab, localhost, and go to the system folder, logs folder, profile. So you can actually directly open this file from your browser. And you'll see the nice formatted HTML output of your profiler. So this is the calendar page, and if I refresh the welcome page, that output is gone again, of course, and now I can refresh this and I'll see the profile for the welcome page. So whatever page I loaded last, I can reload the profiler.php file and see the information on that. And this will only happen for you as a developer because we made it so it checks for the IP address and it only runs it for you. So the public will not interfere with this. You can also make it so that this log file is only readable by you and not by the public. For that, you can just let's close this. Here, add something to the output, and what we're going to add is another IP check. So output equals that IP check stuff dot output, and let's type this stuff now. It's going to be PHP code, and it's like same as before. I'm just going to copy from here. It's going to be if not my IP, escape these single quotes, and just exit. So a person with a different IP can't get to it. That becomes the first line of the output, and that's how you dump it. And let's, for example, refresh. I can still load it, but if I look at my log file, refresh, you see that's the first line, and it's not going to let anyone else go through. So like if this was 2, I would not be able to see it. So if it's 1, matches my IP, I can see it. I also told you I would show you how to display the peak memory usage. Let me show you that real quick. While we have the profiler class overloaded here, we're going to have to overload this memory usage method. If you go into profiler and find that right here, memory usage, copy it to be able to overload that. And the function we're going to use is memory get peak usage, not just memory get usage. And this is the line where it's done. I'm going to copy that line. It might be a little too wide. Okay, it's going to see, it's going to show memory usage. Well, it will be the peak one, so I'll just put that here and use memory get peak usage. So when I load this, refresh that, you'll see the peak. So you see the peak is slightly higher than the actual usage at that point. Let's look at the calendar page. Refresh, refresh. You see there's a difference of 22 kilobytes or so. But this can be a bigger difference depending on what you're doing, how big your script is. Like you might be freeing up variables and garbage collector might get into it might get triggered, etc. And so only having that final usage may be misleading. So you might also want to know what was the peak usage. That's how you do that. So that's about it. And I want to mention that if you want really detailed information like profiling and benchmarking, you might want to check out a tool called Xdebug. Um, this is very commonly used. It's a little more complicated, and there's a learning curve on how to use this. So but it definitely gives you more information. So I recommend that. But for now, I hope you can just utilize the Codeigniter's tools for profiling, benchmarking, and make your next application run even faster and optimize it better. And I hope you learned from this tutorial, and I'll see you next time. Bye.